by Anthony Forwood. For those who don't know, Michael Aquino was a psychological warfare specialist in the U.S. Army from 1968 until 1990, when he was involuntarily discharged as a result of investigations into his involvement in the ritual sexual abuse of children at the Presidio Daycare Center in San Francisco. Throughout this same time, he has also been a devout Satanist and self-confessed neo-Nazi. He joined Anton LaVey's Church of Satan in 1969, staying until 1975 when he left to start his own Temple of Set, which has been in operation ever since. Please note here that both PSYOPs and Satanism involve using many levels of deception and coercion to manipulate the perceptions of others for ulterior motives, so these are skills that Aquino is very familiar with and very comfortable in using. He is also an expert in propaganda and skilled in techniques for disseminating misinformation, disinformation, and using misdirection, confusion tactics, isolation techniques, and revisionism. Therefore, he will certainly use these skills to defend himself against the truth of his actions. Michael Aquino explains that his name keeps coming up in pedophile ring cases because he's the victim of a conspiracy, a black bag job, as he calls it. He bases this on the fact that he's a Satanist and so people just automatically hate him because of it. Unfortunately for him, making such a bad choice in lifestyle and philosophy doesn't excuse him from anything, although in his particular case it certainly does lend weight to the allegations against him and even invites them, so he shouldn't really complain about it. He tends to keep his perceptions of all this bad publicity focused strictly on the Presidio child abuse case in which he was a central figure during the 1980s, since that's the only one he's ever had to legally defend himself against so far. Even in this one isolated case, he only dares to focus on it as far as his own limited version of the facts go, and he totally avoids acknowledging the larger body of evidence that implicates him personally. Similarly, he totally overlooks the longer history of events he's been implicated in by various sources who are far removed from one another and who couldn't possibly be engaged in any sort of conspiracy against him. Whatever the case, I'm not going to attempt to detail all of the evidence against Michael Aquino here, since there's far too much of it for this short article. I merely want to put his claim of conspiracy into proper perspective, in order to show how absurd it really is. Time after time, Michael Aquino has been pointed at as a ruthlessly evil defiler and abuser of the most innocent and defenseless among us, young children, and it was as early as 1980 that the putrid history of his involvement in pedophilia and mind control can be traced back to, at least in the public records, but it probably goes back much further. The following provides a short historical record of events that ties Aquino to a larger criminal syndicate operating through the U.S. government, and reveals his position within it. ***** 1967 Michael Aquino began a 2-year tour of duty in Vietnam, taking part in the infamous Phoenix program. The Phoenix program was an assassination, torture, terror operation that was initiated by the CIA, with the aim of neutralizing the civilian infrastructure that supported the Viet Cong insurgency in South Vietnam. It was a terrifying, final solution that blatantly violated the Geneva Conventions. Targets for assassination included VC tax collectors, supply officers, political cadre, local military officials, and suspected sympathizers. However, faulty intelligence more often than not led to the murder of innocent civilians, even young children. Sometimes orders were even given to kill U.S. military personnel who were considered security risks. In 1971, William Colby, head of CIA in Vietnam at the time, later testified that the number killed was 20,857, while South Vietnamese government figures claimed it was 40,994 dead. This murderous PSYOP program had the effect of creating legions of cold-blooded psychopathic killers who would return home to the USA as completely different people than when they left. Many of them would become involved in Satanism during or after their involvement in the Phoenix program. And Michael Aquino was there to lead them into it. Soon after these killers started coming home, there began a steady rise in horrific serial murders with satanic undertones that centered around the Southern California area, where Michael Aquino has always lived. 1980 According to sworn testimony given before a U.S. Senate in later years, MKULTRA mind control victim Kathy O'Brien claimed that she was programmed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, in 1980 by Lieutenant Paul Michael Aquino of the U.S. Army. She stated that Aquino used barbaric trauma techniques on both her daughter Kelly and herself that involved NASA technology. Kathy O'Brien claimed that she was a presidential model monarch sex slave, meaning that she was specially programmed to cater to the sexual perversions of the highest-ranking politicians in the USA. She stated that during her time as a sex slave, which started as a child, she serviced a number of well-known politicians, including both Bill and Hillary Clinton, Ronald Reagan, Pierre Trudeau, Brian Mulroney, George H.W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Governors Lamar Alexander and Richard Thornburg, Bill Bennett, Senator Patrick Leahy, Senator Robert Byrd, who she says was her handler, and Arlen Specter. O'Brien eventually gave testimony before the U.S. Senate regarding the events she was forced to go through, and although she named her perpetrators, not one of them dared to challenge her or accuse her of slander.